Hello and welcome to the B6 Quickfire Question Quiz. We have 40 questions today, 30 for all students and 10 extra questions for those studying triple science. So let's start with our first question. Don't forget you can meet up with your friends on FaceTime or Zoom or whatever you want to, and you can compete for points. What is the scientific definition of sexual reproduction? Don't talk about kind of your obvious definitions. What is the scientific definition of sexual reproduction? Question 1. And the answer is the fusion of gametes. Okay, gametes are the sex cells, and it's the fusion of those that makes it sexual reproduction, not asexual reproduction. Question 2. What does asexual reproduction produce? What does asexual reproduction produce? There's only one parent in asexual reproduction, and the answer is clones. They have an identical genetic makeup to the parent because it's the parent producing the offspring on its own. So all the genetic information comes from that one parent. Question 3. What are the gametes in flowering plants called? What are the gametes, so the sex cells in flowering plants, called? I have to think back to primary school when you did pollination. And the answer is pollen and the ovule. You can call it the egg, but ovule is a better word. And it's pollination is that reproduction there. Question 4. How many cells are made in meiosis? How many cells are made in meiosis? In mitosis, 2 cells are made and they're identical. How many are made in meiosis? And the answer is 4 non-identical cells. We have that kind of mix up of all of the chromosomes, so they're not identical, but there's 4 of them, opposed to mitosis where there's 2 identical cells. Question 5. Where does meiosis occur? So where in the body does meiosis occur? And the answer is in the sex organs, the ovaries and the testes. Question 6. How would you describe the structure of DNA? How would you describe the structure of DNA? 2 possible things you could say here. And the answer is double helix and also a polymer. It's lots of smaller units, monomers, put together to make a long polymer chain. Question 7. What was the purpose of the Human Genome Project? So your genome is your genetic makeup. What was the purpose of the Human Genome Project? And the answer is to discover all the possible genes. It was lots of scientists working together from across the world to discover all the possible human genes. Question 8. What word do we use to describe the physical expression of a gene? What word do we use to describe the physical expression of a gene? And that word physical gives us a clue there because the answer is a bit similar to the word physical. And the answer is phenotype. We've got the genotype, which is the genetic code, and the phenotype, the physical expression of the gene. Question 9. What word do we use to describe the pair of alleles, the genotype, that are the same? What word do we use to describe a pair of alleles, that's a genotype, that are the same? And the answer is homozygous. So homozygous if they're the same, heterozygous if they are different. Question 10. Is polydactyly a dominant or recessive trait? So we've got a 50-50 here. Is polydactyly, having an extra finger or toe, a dominant or recessive trait? And the answer is it's dominant. Okay, so we need one of the dominant alleles in order to get it. Question 11. How many recessive alleles must be present in a genotype to get that recessive trait? How many recessive alleles must be present in a genotype to get that recessive trait? So there's 2 alleles in a genotype. So the answer could be 1 or it could be 2. And the answer is 2, because a dominant trait can be passed on with only 1 allele. Recessive traits have to be passed on with 2 alleles. Question 12. What are the sex chromosomes for men? What are the sex chromosomes for men? And the answer is XY. Women are XX and men are XY. Question 13. What are the 2 causes of variation in offspring? So we all have variety in the offspring that are produced. What are the 2 causes of that variation? And the answer is, or 2 answers. First one, sexual reproduction, so obtaining some of those traits from one parent and some of those traits from the other parent produces variety. And also mutation. Talk about mutation a lot as we go through this topic. Question 14. What was Darwin's theory of evolution called? What was Darwin's theory of evolution called? As it's a bit of a long-winded one, this. You could say either of the 2 points. And the answer is survival of the fittest by natural selection. If you said survival of the fittest or if you said natural selection, that's okay. Natural selection, the best answer or the ultimate answer is survival of the fittest by natural selection. Saying that the individuals with the best features are more likely to survive, therefore reproduce, and therefore pass on those genes, those traits to their offspring. Question 15. What was the name of the diagram that shows the development of species from a single ancestral species? What's the name of the diagram that shows the development of species from a single ancestral species? So this is the diagram with lots of branches, that's a clue, coming off from it, showing you when different species became their own species. And the answer is evolutionary tree or evolutionary tree, whichever way you choose to say it. Question 16. What is the key feature of the hybrid offspring of 2 different species of animals? So we talked about the zedonk, the hybrid of the zebra and the donkey. We've also talked about the liger, which is the lion and the zebra. Sorry, the lion and the tiger. Lion and zebra, wow. What is the key feature of a hybrid offspring? And the answer is they're infertile. They're not able to reproduce and have offspring of their own. Okay, so it kind of stops that process from any more hybrids being produced. Question 17. What do we call the process where we select the individuals we want to breed based on the traits they have? So this isn't a natural process, this is human intervention, humans choosing those individuals because they've got good features, maybe in a farmer type setting, and they choose those individuals to breed. What's that called? And the answer is selective breeding. So we've selected them and then bred them together. Question 18. Does selective breeding work on the first generation of offspring? So in other words, if we choose our individuals, do we straight away with the next offspring get exactly the features from the two parents that we're looking for? So does selective breeding work on the first generation of offspring? And the answer is no. Offspring are repeatedly selected and bred over many generations, sometimes thousands of years. Okay, and we looked at the development of chickens over about 50 years to get them bigger and bigger. They've been selectively bred. Question 19. What do we call the process of extracting a gene and placing it into the DNA of another individual? What do we call the process of extracting a gene and placing it into the DNA of another individual? So we've isolated a gene, we've extracted it, and then we put it into another individual. What do we call that? Two possible answers. One will do. And the answer is genetic modification, or you may hear it called genetic engineering. Both mean the same thing. Question 20. What is used to extract the gene in genetic modification? What do we use to cut that gene out in genetic modification? And it is not a very sharp knife. And the answer is an enzyme. Okay, enzymes can chop that gene out and place it into the new genetic code. Question 21. What is genetically modified to make insulin for type 1 diabetes? What is genetically modified to make insulin for type 1 diabetes? In other words, we've got the insulin making the gene, and we cut it out of the genetic code of a human using enzymes, and then we put it into something, and that makes the insulin. What do we put it into? And the answer is bacteria, because they multiply quickly, and then we end up with lots of bacteria that all can make insulin. Question 22. Fossils can be formed by mineralisation and footprints. So that's prints in the mud, which is the footprints that then solidify, and mineralisation where they get buried under sediment and then minerals take the place of the bone. What two other methods can be used to make fossils? What two other methods can be used to make fossils? And the answer is in ice, so frozen in ice, and also in amber. So tree sap falls over an insect. Maybe the insect's landed on the tree, got stuck in the tree sap, and then it kind of oozes over it, solidifies and becomes amber. Question 23. What are the two causes for gaps in the fossil record? So we might have lots of information about fossils and dated them from different periods of time. Why might we have some gaps in that fossil record? And the answer is because they might not have been discovered yet, or they may well have been destroyed, and that might be by natural disaster or construction. Question 24. Why do we have limited knowledge of the evolution of soft-bodied organisms? Why do we have limited knowledge of the evolution of soft-bodied organisms? I'm talking about the jellyfish, maybe a starfish, that kind of thing. Why don't we have much knowledge of how they've developed over time? And the answer is they decay before they have a chance to fossilise. So we don't have any fossils to see how they've developed over time. Question 25. What could be the cause of extinction for a particular species? Now you can see I've left quite a big gap here. We have 6 different causes of extinction. So I'm going to give you a second just to work your way through those. So what could cause a species to become extinct? And the answers are disease, so a new pathogen to the area, climate change, loss of food, loss of habitat, new predator coming into the area, so hunting or poaching go into that category, and natural disaster, which includes all of our earthquakes and volcanoes and that sort of thing. Okay. Question 26. Why is it important for a patient to complete all the antibiotics they are prescribed? So we have a bacterial infection, we go to the doctors and the doctors prescribe us antibiotics. We go to the pharmacy and we collect those antibiotics. Why is it important that the patient completes all of the antibiotics they are prescribed? They're going to kill the bacteria. Why is it important to take them all? And the answer is to ensure all the bacteria has been killed. We need to make sure that this low level of bacteria that we're able to have in our bodies and not feel ill from have all been killed, okay? Because if we have that small population left over, then they will, but we feel okay, they will start to reproduce and then we'll feel ill again. Okay, moving on to question 27. What is the main problem with taking antibiotics on a frequent basis? So I go to the doctor and I ask for antibiotics and the doctor says, okay, yes, you can have them. And then a few weeks later I go back and I say, oh, I still have another bacterial infection. They get given antibiotics again. What's bad about that? What can happen inside our bodies? And the answer is, if the non-resistant strains of bacteria are being killed, there will be a rise in the number of mutated resistant strains of bacteria. This happens by natural selection. So basically, we've got all these bacteria in our body and some of them have mutated and that's created the resistant strain. They're resistant to the antibiotics. And if we destroy with the antibiotics the resistant strain, it gives the mutated resistant strain a greater chance of survival. It will allow them to reproduce and then thrive, and then we're going to be ill from the mutated strain. So it's best just to let our body fight rather than antibiotics, which will only be able to kill those non-resistant bacteria. Tricky one to get your head around, that one. Question 28. Which word is missing? Kingdom, phylum, class, family, genus, species. Which word is not present that should be? And the answer is order. If you remember our phrase, King Philip came out for good soup, it's the out that's missing and the word is order. Question 29. Which two words in the Linnaean system are used in binomial classification? So which two words from that list are used in binomial classification? Bi meaning two, and that's why I've asked for two words. Nomial meaning name, and classification, the whole process. And the answer is the genus and the species. Okay, so if we look at that long list, they're the last two in the list, genus and species. That gives us the name of the individual. Question 30, the last question for combined double students. What was the name of the system developed after the Linnaean system? So there were two Carls. The first Carl came up with the Linnaean system, which we've just looked at. What was the name of the system that was developed for classification after the Linnaean system? And the answer is the three-domain system. So putting three main categories for the classification. We're now moving on to the triple questions. So we're now looking at question 31, and these are for triple science students only. Which base, should be a comma, which base pairs up with C? Which base pairs up with C? Think of the shape of C, it does help you. And the answer is G. You've got that curved shape, so C with G and A with T. Question 32. What does a sugar, a phosphate and a base make up? What does a sugar, a phosphate and a base make up? And the answer is a nucleotide. So one sugar and one phosphate, they're found in the backbone of the DNA, and then the base, which could be A, T, C or G, that makes up the nucleotide. Question 33. How many base pairs are in one amino acid? How many base pairs are found in one amino acid? And the answer is 3. Question 34. What is made in protein synthesis after the DNA unzips? So think through the whole process of protein synthesis. The DNA unzips. What is made after that happens? And the answer is a template. And then that template moves to the ribosome to build that protein. Question 35. What process uses the best male and female gametes, then splits the embryo into 4 after fertilisation and before implantation? So it's kind of like IVF, choosing the best gametes, fertilising them in a petri dish, then splitting that embryo and implanting them into 4 surrogate mothers. What process is that? And the answer is embryo transplantation. It's the form of cloning that everybody forgets. Okay, so embryo transplantation, if you're thinking, I'm not sure, I can't remember, do a bit of research on that one later. Question 36. What process fuses an empty egg cell with a skin cell? What process fuses an empty egg cell with a skin cell? And the answer is adult cloning. And this is how Dolly the sheep was made. Question 37. Who said that environmental changes that occur to the body were passed on to offspring? Who said, we've got a couple of typos there, sorry about that. Who said that environmental changes that occur to the body were passed on to offspring? It was proved to be wrong afterwards. Basically saying if you get a scar during your life and then you have a child, that child will be born with the same scar. So that can't possibly happen. And the answer is Lamarck. Question 38. What is the process of a single ancestral population evolving to become 2 separate species? What is the process of a single ancestral population evolving to become 2 separate species called? This is our classic 6 marker, where they are one ancestral population, they get split geographically, natural selection occurs and they adapt to those environments, and then they join together again and they can't reproduce to make fertile offspring, and we say they become separate species. What's that process called? And the answer is speciation. 2 questions left. Question 39. Who is best known for their work on warning colouration and the theory of speciation? Who developed that idea, the theory of speciation? This person worked with Darwin on his Origin of the Species book, but he was best known for his theory of speciation. And the answer is Wallace. Okay. Moving on, final question, question 40. Who was known as the father of genetics, understanding dominant and recessive traits? This was the monk who did lots and lots of breeding with pea plants, looking at wrinkly and smooth peas, and as a result discovered that some genes are dominant and some are recessive. Last question, who was that? And the answer is Mendel. So that's the end of the B6 quickfire question quiz. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you challenged yourself and challenged your friends. If you enjoyed it, subscribe. Have a great day. Thank you.